If you are listening to this, chances are you've experienced the modern phenomenon of burnout.
Hmm.
We often talk about the emotional weight, the exhaustion, the cynicism. But if you have ever been in that state, you know the single most frustrating symptom is that your brain feels broken.
Right.
You struggle to concentrate, your thinking is slow, and making any complex decision feels impossible.
That classic feeling of brain fog, it isn't just, psychological fatigue. It's an objective, measurable, physiological state.
Okay, so not just a feeling.
Not just a feeling. We are talking about genuine difficulty concentrating, processing information slowly, and compromised decision-making that really impairs performance in your daily life.
Yeah.
People describe feeling mentally heavy as though they are, wading through molasses just to complete simple cognitive tasks.
Exactly. For years, burnout was treated primarily as, an emotional or maybe a spiritual crisis. Today, we are moving beyond the subjective experience to look at the core infrastructure, the measurable impact of chronic stress on your brain's command center.
I think that's the key shift.
Think of your prefrontal cortex, the PFC, as the executive suite, the CEO of your cognitive world.
Right. It is the region responsible for executive control, all the high-level coordination needed to manage competing inputs, maintain long-term goals, and regulate all the lower-level emotional responses that try to hijack your focus.
And here is the crucial insight, and this is what we're really digging into today. When you are chronically stressed, that CEO office is the primary target. We're going to look at how burnout structurally and functionally breaks down the very regions that make you, functional.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission in this deep dive is sharp and very neurobiological. We are going to unpack the specific deficits in cognitive control that are associated with burnout.
Okay.
We want to know what changes, both structural thinning and functional disconnection, what's happening particularly in the most critical centers of the PFC.
And that would include the dorsolateral and the ventrolateral
The
PFS.
DLPFC and the VLPFC.
Exactly. And to do this, we are relying on high-resolution objective data. We've pulled a stack of sources that use some really sophisticated neuroimaging techniques.
Right.
Specifically, we're talking functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, which measures brain activity, and something called voxel-based morphometry, or VBM, which actually measures the physical gray matter volume.
So we can see both what the brain is doing and what it physically looks like.
Exactly. These tools give us objective evidence of damage and dysfunction in the executive center.
And as always, we will ensure every major finding is attributed to its source, citing the study name, date, and principal author, so you know exactly where this knowledge is grounded.
The sources for this dive are, they're remarkably diverse and targeted. They include systematic reviews on objective cognitive functioning, like the comprehensive work by DLPFC, Panagopoulou, Montgomery, and Missoura from 2014.
DLPFC, okay. That name will come out a lot, I imagine.
It will. It really sets the benchmark for defining these cognitive deficits. We also have crucial translational studies linking psychosocial stress and PFC disruption, like the Liston, McEwen, and Casey research from 2009.
And that one's key because it tracks how stress degrades connectivity over time, right?
Precisely. And finally, we'll analyze specific neuroimaging correlates observed in highly stressed populations like medical professionals, detailed in papers such as Durning, Costanzo, Artino Jr. et al. From 2013, and a more recent one by Abe, Tay, Takahashi, and Fujino from 2022.
So we have a really broad base here.
We do. This breadth lets us connect the cellular science to real-world, high-stakes cognitive failure.
Yeah, let's ground this analysis in the lived experience of burnout. The formal characteristics, we know them: emotional exhaustion, cynicism or depersonalization, and a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. Those are the established pillars. But how central is the cognitive cost? Is it truly a defining feature?
Oh, it is absolutely central. The subjective experience of cognitive decline it's inseparable from the burnout narrative.
Really? So it's not just a side effect of being tired?
No, not at all. The sources confirm that individuals struggling with burnout frequently report very specific issues: memory lapses, difficulty sustaining attention, and concentration deficits in their daily lives.
Okay.
This was emphasized by researchers like Schaufelli, Leiter, and Masloch back in 2009, and even earlier by Weber and Jekyll Reinhard in 2000. Their findings are cited in that landmark DLPFC et al. Review from 2014.
So we're not just talking about being too tired to focus, we're talking about a specific reduction in mental agility itself.
Precisely. For some experts, this isn't just a side effect, it's a core construct of burnout.
A core construct.
Yeah. Consider the Shahram-Melamed Burnout Questionnaire. Researchers like Shriram, Nirel, and Vinokor in 2006 also cited in the Delakaris review they included cognitive weariness, defined as reduced mental agility and slow thinking, as one of the construct's three primary dimensions.
Wow, so right up there with emotional exhaustion.
Right up there. This reinforces that the feeling of being mentally clumsy or slow is intrinsically linked to the burnout state, independent of, say, mood or sleep issues.
That brings us to the crucial pivot then. Moving from someone saying, I feel slow and clumsy, to objectively measuring that slowdown in a lab setting. What does the hard, objective data tell us about the existence and, the nature of these cognitive deficits?
This is where that systematic review by Delakaris, Panagopoulou, Montgomery, and Missoura from 2014 provides the definitive answer.
Okay, the big one.
The big one. They analyzed 15 studies that used objective psychometric tests. So, timed, standardized cognitive measures, not just self-reports, to assess the association between burnout and functioning.
And across those 15 studies, what were the most impacted cognitive domains? What's taking the biggest hit?
The key finding was, well, it was undeniable. Burnout is objectively associated with a measurable decline in three main cognitive functions.
Three.
Executive functions, attention, and memory. That was the definitive conclusion from Delakaris and his team in 2014. It just confirms that cognitive impairment is a global feature of the burnout state.
Let's zero in on executive functions, since that's the job of the PFC, the brain's CEO. What exactly is being impaired within that system?
Right. So executive functions, these are the cognitive control mechanisms centered in the prefrontal cortex. They were the most frequently and intensely studied function in that review. Out of the 10 relevant studies they analyzed, 9 found objective cognitive impairment associated with core executive functions.
9 out of 10. That's a huge consensus.
A huge consensus. These are the functions that allow you to manage complex life.
So what are they specifically?
Specifically, the deficits centered around 3 core components. First, switching ability, which is the mental flexibility required to jump efficiently between tasks or different sets of rules. Second, updating.
Which sounds like what it is.
It is. The ability to maintain and manipulate information in your working memory. It's essential for, say, following multi-step instructions or complex reports. And third, inhibition.
Okay, stopping yourself from doing things.
Or thinking things. The capacity to suppress irrelevant internal chatter or inappropriate responses, allowing you to focus on the task at hand. All 3 of those components were shown to be compromised in individuals experiencing burnout, according to Delakaris et al., in 2014.
So if you feel like you can't stop the internal monologue about yesterday's argument while trying to prepare for today's meeting, that's an inhibition deficit.
That's a perfect example.
And if you lose your place constantly in a long email chain and have to reread the last 3 points, that's an updating deficit.
Precisely. And the data backs this up tangibly. The work by Ullman, Norden, Bergdahl, and their team in 2007, which was cited in that Delakaris systematic review, found that burnout symptoms were moderately associated with objective deficits across all 3 of these components.
Switching, updating, and inhibition.
All 3. The functional impairment is real, it's measurable, and it's broad.
This entire discussion hinges on this idea of cognitive control. If the PFC is the CEO, cognitive control is the job description. Can you define that for us in the context of what the brain is failing to accomplish under stress?
Cognitive control is, it's like the brain's air traffic controller. It is this sophisticated, top-down ability to integrate all the incoming sensory information with your internal goals and learned rules to coordinate appropriate goal-directed behavior.
So it's juggling everything.
It's juggling everything, dynamically allocating your limited attention resources and processing streams as efficiently as possible.
And why does this breakdown in cognitive control matter so much in high-stakes professions? You mentioned many of our sources investigate medical settings.
Right. In high-stakes environments, compromised cognitive function due to stress is thought to be the direct underlying basis for burnout-dependent errors, whether those are medical errors, financial misjudgments, or, engineering failures. When your internal air traffic controller, that capacity to flexibly adjust and filter inputs is severely impaired, critical mistakes become statistically inevitable.
So the neurobiological mechanism is the root cause of the performance drop, not just some unfortunate coincidence.
That's the critical link that researchers like Durning, Costanzo, Artino Jr., and their colleagues were investigating back in 2013. They explicitly state that neurobiologically, chronic mental stress compromises this function by producing measurable structural and functional changes in the specific prefrontal regions responsible for cognitive control.
And that sets the stage perfectly for our deep dive into the brain scans themselves. Where exactly does the physical and functional damage actually happen?
Let's go there.
Okay, so let's go inside the skull and track the physical footprint left by chronic stress. We know stress floods the system with hormones. What does that hormonal tidal wave do to the structure of the PFC?
Chronic stress initiates a toxic signaling cascade, and the PFC is highly vulnerable to it because it contains a very high density of receptors for stress hormones.
It's just built to absorb this stuff.
It's uniquely sensitive. This cascade involves an excessive release of glucocorticoids and catecholamines, your primary physiological stress responders. And these hormones are linked to profound, observable structural changes in the PFC's pyramidal neurons.
And what do these structural changes look like at a microcellular level? Is it like erosion?
Yeah, in a way, that's a good analogy. The changes include the pruning of dendritic spines and the shrinking of apical arbors.
Okay, break that down.
Think of a neuron like a tree. It uses its branches, its dendrites, to communicate with other neurons.
Right.
Chronic stress causes these trees to lose their finest branches and connection points, which makes communication much harder, slower, and just less robust.
So the wiring is literally degrading.
The wiring is degrading. This cellular atrophy is well documented by researchers like McEwen and their team in 2016 and Wu et al. In 2021. Their findings are reviewed in depth by Cremiel and Kupas in 2025. This loss of connectivity translates directly to a reduction in gray matter volume, which is what we can measure using voxel-based morphometry.
And you mentioned VBM studies finding a specific area of structural loss that's related to emotional exhaustion. Where is this attrition happening, and what does it reveal about the source of that fatigue?
The key structural finding, the one that really stands out, relates to the ventromedial PFC, or the VMPF.
The VMPFC. Okay.
VBM study by Abe, Tay, Takahashi, and Fujino in 2022, which focused specifically on medical professionals, found a clear linear relationship.
A linear one.
A linear one. Higher emotional exhaustion scores tracked linearly with smaller VMPFC volumes. This is a powerful finding because it shows that the subjective feeling of being drained corresponds to a physical, measurable loss of brain tissue volume in a key regulatory area.
Wow. So emotional exhaustion isn't just about feeling tired, it is structural. What are the clinical implications of losing volume in the VMPFC? What is that specific region responsible for in terms of regulating our emotional state?
The VMPFC is critically important because it acts as the brain's primary brake on our threat circuitry.
A brake.
It sends strong inhibitory signals down to the amygdala and the hypothalamus, the deepest, most ancient parts of the brain responsible for generating fear, anxiety, and triggering the fight-or-flight response.
And if that brake region shrinks,
the ability to stop the stress response diminishes. As it's eloquently described in the Cremiel and Kupas review from 2025, the VMPFC shrinkage causes the brake pads to thin.
Thin brake pads. I like that analogy.
That's a good one. This results in prolonged, unchecked autonomic arousal. The amygdala is just running wild, sending alarm signals long after the danger has passed, and the stress response lasts much longer than it should.
So that's why it feels relentless.
That structural failure, the thinning of the brake pads, is believed to be the neurobiological basis for the subjective sense of relentless, pervasive emotional exhaustion that defines burnout.
That structural degradation is deeply unsettling. But my personal experience with chronic stress is that I also feel like I'm trying too hard to concentrate, often without any success. Does the rest of the PFC try to compensate for the damage to the VMPFC?
That's a perfect transition because that experience of intense, effortful focus tracks perfectly with what functional imaging shows in the dorsolateral PFC, or DLPFC.
To DLPFC.
The epicenter of working memory and high-level control. The literature reveals a really complex pattern of activation, shifting between hyperactivation, which is overworking, and eventual hypoactivation, which is giving up. And it reveals a fundamental problem of efficiency.
Let's look at the compensatory overdrive phase first. This is the brain trying to muscle through the damage by pushing harder, correct?
That's absolutely right. In the earlier, or say moderate stages of burnout, the brain attempts to push the executive network harder, just to maintain baseline performance. This is a concept widely discussed in the Cremiel and Kupas review.
And that's the stage where you feel drained, but you're still forcing yourself hour after hour to maintain concentration.
You're white-knuckling it, neurologically speaking.
So what's the objective fMRI evidence for that forced effort? How do we see the brain slamming the gas pedal down.
The gold standard for measuring this effort is the BOLD-IN response. It stands for blood oxygen level dependent signal. It's essentially a proxy for how much blood and oxygen a specific brain region is using.
So more bold means more work?
More work, more energy consumption. The study by Durning, Costanzo, Artino Jr. and their team from 2013, focusing on internal medicine residents, found that those with higher emotional exhaustion scores showed significantly larger BOLD-I responses, meaning higher neural activity and more resource consumption in the right middle frontal gyrus, which is Brodmann Area 6, and the posterior cingulate cortex, all while they were answering complex diagnostic questions.
And this has been replicated.
It has. To confirm this pattern, another study by DeAndrade and his team in 2016, also cited in Chamil and Kirpus, found a linear rise in right DLPFC activation during a demanding conflict task called the Stroop task, as burnout scores increased in pediatric residents.
So these are all undeniable signs of the brain spending vastly more energy just to do a task.
Exactly.
But the sources suggest this maximum effort is failing. This is the essence of neural inefficiency. The brain is spending all this extra effort, but is it actually improving performance?
Crucially, no. And this is the key insight from these task-based fMRI studies. This strongest DLPFC signal, indicating maximum metabolic effort, was coupled with the slowest behavioral responses.
So they're working harder and performing worse.
Precisely. The Chamay-Kirpus review makes this point vividly. The brain is burning extra oxygen, engaging far more circuitry than necessary. It's struggling and consuming enormous, unsustainable resources, but it is failing to maintain optimal speed and accuracy.
So the key takeaway here is that my brain isn't just tired. It's actively working against itself. It's wasting energy just to deliver a slow, subpar result. That perfectly captures the feeling of spending 5 grueling hours on a task that should take 1 and still being completely exhausted afterward.
Exactly. It shows that burnout doesn't just reduce capability. It fundamentally makes the attempt at maintaining capability neurologically inefficient and metabolically costly. It is like running your computer with 50 unnecessary programs open, all fighting for the same limited processing space.
Now, you mention a shift to reduced activity, which seems to track with the cynicism or depersonalization component of burnout. Does the PFC eventually just give up?
That link was specifically observed in the subsequent phase investigated in that same Durning et al. Study from 2013. They found that high depersonalization scores, that feeling of detachment and cynicism, correlated with a significant reduced BOLD-I signal in the right DLPFC.
A reduced signal.
A reduced signal, specifically in Brodmann Area 9, during the reflection and evaluation phases of solving clinical problems.
So, if emotional exhaustion correlates with pressing the gas pedal inefficiently, depersonalization seems to correlate with just taking your foot off the gas entirely.
Yes.
Particularly during the thoughtful evaluation of a problem where you need to integrate and reflect.
It suggests a profound withdrawal of neural resources from the highest executive center, precisely when complex evaluative processing is required. In summary, chronic stress first forces its inefficient, costly hyperactivation, and then, likely as the structural atrophy progresses or detachment sets in, it leads to a critical hypoactivation in key control areas.
The CEO is either yelling pointlessly or has simply stopped answering the phone.
That's a perfect way to put it.
That idea of the CEO not answering the phone brings us to the actual mechanism of brain fog. Disrupted connectivity. Cognitive control isn't one brain region operating alone. It's a massive coordinated network. If the CEO's office, the DLPFC, is still active, but the internal phone lines to the rest of the company are down, performance collapses, regardless of how hard the CEO is yelling.
That's the perfect analogy. The ability to perform complex cognitive tasks, particularly the mental switching and flexibility required in daily life, relies heavily on the functional coupling within the frontal-parietal network.
The frontal-parietal network.
And that network includes the DLPFC and the VLPFC. If those connections degrade, your ability to think flexibly just vanishes.
The study by Liston, McEwen, and Casey from 2009 is crucial here because they directly observed this mechanism in healthy adults exposed to stress.
Right, which allows us to see the cause and effect of chronic psychosocial stress.
So what did they find regarding attention shifting?
Liston and his team studied healthy university students preparing for a major, high-stakes academic examination, a classic real-world model of chronic psychosocial stress.
Like the bar exam or medical boards.
Exactly. They confirmed elevated stress levels using standardized psychological scales over a 1-month period, and then they tested them on a heavily PFC-dependent attention-shifting task.
And what happened to their cognitive performance in that month? Did it drop?
It did. They observed selective and significant impairment in the attention-shifting task. But more importantly, using fMRI, they confirmed that this chronic stress disrupted functional connectivity, meaning the communication synchronicity within that frontoparietal network that mediates attention shifts.
So it's direct, objective evidence. Stress impairs the network connections that support flexible thinking and focus.
It's the smoking gun.
Let's get granular on which connections were broken. This is where the nuanced difference between the DLPFC and VLPFC becomes critical, and where we find the mechanism of brain fog.
Let's use our analogy to differentiate them. The DLPFC, the dorsolateral PFC, is essentially the computer's RAM or working memory buffer. It maintains and actively manipulates the information you need right now.
Okay, the brain scratch pad.
The scratch pad. The VLPFC, the ventrolateral PFC on the other hand, acts as the gatekeeper or filter. It is involved in selection, inhibition, and controlling the retrieval of relevant information while suppressing distracting inputs.
So RAM and a filter.
They must work perfectly together to achieve smooth cognitive control. And what the Liston et al. Study from 2009 found was that the chronically stressed subjects showed significant decoupling. A measurable decrease in synchronized activity of the left DLPFC with several important network areas. This included the right DLPFC, the premotor cortex, and most significantly, the bilateral ventral PFC, VLPFC. This represents a profound loss of synchronous communication across the highest levels of cognitive control.
Why is that specific decoupling between the RAM, the DLPFC, and the gatekeeper, the VLPFC, so detrimental to cognitive function?
When the DLPFC and VLPFC decouple, the critical top-down control necessary for switching mental sets moving fluidly from one task to another, it fails. Imagine the RAM having the information ready, but the gatekeeper isn't there to filter the incoming noise or help select the next action.
Everything just grinds to a halt.
It does. And the Liston et al. Study quantified this beautifully. They found the decreased functional coupling between the DLPFC and the rest of the network was directly associated with greater impairments in attention shifting. They measured this as significantly longer reaction times, which they called the shift cost.
That is the mechanical explanation for brain fog. If the DLPFC and VLPFC aren't communicating efficiently, my brain cannot smoothly transition from reading an email to starting a new report. The result is a measurable delay, increased errors, and the subjective feeling of having mentally stalled.
That's the real-world implication for you, the listener. This decoupling means brain fog isn't an arbitrary feeling of being tired. It's a verifiable failure of the DLPFC to coordinate top-down control across the brain. It severely impedes flexible attentional control and the ability to switch between mental sets, which is central to all complex knowledge work.
We've established local disconnections, but what about the overall structure of the brain's communication system? Does burnout affect the global communication infrastructure?
Yes, the entire network topology suffers. Resting state studies confirm that burnout impacts global brain coordination, suggesting widespread communication failure.
Not just local phone lines are down, the whole internet is slow.
That's a good way to think about it. The comprehensive work by Shang and their team in 2022, cited in the AFEC et al. Review from 2025, found that burnout is associated with two specific network metrics degrading.
What are they?
Increased characteristic path length and decreased global efficiency in functional networks.
Okay, translate that.
To put that into our analogy, imagine your brain is a highway system. Increased characteristic path length means information has to travel longer, more circuitous routes to connect distant brain areas.
A longer commute.
A longer, less efficient commute. And decreased global efficiency means the overall flow of traffic is slow and jammed everywhere.
So information can still get from point A to point B, but it takes 3 times longer and burns 3 times more fuel to do so. The functional network topology is literally degrading.
Exactly. And we have confirmation from electrophysiological studies as well. The recent EEG study by AFEC, Harmatiuk, Gajowska, and their team in 2025 provides converging evidence.
What did they find?
They found decreased functional connectivity in frontal and midline areas in a specific rhythm, the alpha-3 subband, during the eyes open condition. This deficit was strongest in the right frontal area.
Which lines up with the fMRI data.
It does. This observation strongly supports the view that burnout results in profoundly disrupted frontal regulatory systems, aligning perfectly with the fMRI findings of prefrontal inefficiency and decoupling.
Hearing about structural erosion and network disintegration can be, frankly, pretty disheartening. But we must remember that the brain is plastic. Before we get to recovery, let's explore a crucial finding. Who is most vulnerable to these neurological effects? And why does experience seem to offer some protection?
This is a vital area that links expertise directly to neurobiological resilience. The neurobiological impact of burnout on cognitive function, specifically that neural inefficiency problem we discussed in the DLPFC, was primarily seen in the inexperienced residents.
Okay.
But significantly, it was not seen in experienced faculty members, according to that Durning et al. Study from 2013.
Why would faculty be shielded from these objective burnout-related cognitive changes, even if they reported similar levels of overall stress?
The faculty likely possess greater experience-dependent cognitive control. This just translates to higher neural efficiency.
So practice makes perfect, neurologically.
In a way, yes. Over years of practice, their clinical reasoning processes become highly automatized and require less conscious effort. They perform complex tasks using far fewer cognitive resources, which effectively shields them from the exhaustion-related inefficiency that we see in the residents.
Can you explain that in terms of cognitive load?
We can. We can understand this through the lens of cognitive load theory, which was applied in the Durning study. Your working memory has a severely limited processing space, the traditional 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. Emotional exhaustion exacerbates cognitive load by inducing that inefficient brain activation.
It's like installing massive, slow bloatware that consumes all the CPU power, even when the computer is idle.
Precisely. An inexperienced person, a resident, is already using a ton of CPU power just to solve a new, novel problem. Then, burnout throws on this massive inefficiency layer, quickly consuming that limited 7 to 982 space.
And performance collapses.
It makes the resident critically vulnerable to performance collapse and error. The faculty, having achieved neural efficiency, start with a lower base cognitive load. This gives them a much larger buffer against the exhaustion-dependent inefficiency. Their hard-won expertise acts as a neurobiological shield.
That reframes experience not just as knowing more, but as running a more efficient brain. Now, for the most important part, are these structural and functional changes permanent scars, or can we rebuild the executive suite?
This is the most encouraging news. The evidence points toward high plasticity and strong reversibility.
Okay, good.
The effects of chronic stress on PFC function in humans were shown to be largely reversible after just 1 month of reduced stress.
Just 1 month.
Just 1 month. This was demonstrated in the remarkable longitudinal work by Liston, McEwen, and Casey back in 2009.
So in 1 month of reduced stress, the functional coupling returned across the network. That's fast.
It is remarkably fast. In nearly all the tested areas, the functional coupling, the synchronization between brain regions, it reversed back toward control levels. This suggests that the functional impairments, the inability to coordinate attention that caused the brain fog, were predominantly state-dependent.
Meaning they were temporary effects of the stress, not permanent trait changes.
Exactly.
Was there any region that resisted this recovery, a lingering vulnerability or scar?
Yes, there was one very important exception identified by Liston, McEwen, and Casey. Even after 1 month of reduced stress, the ventrolateral PFC, VLPFC, remained decoupled relative to the control group.
The gatekeeper.
The gatekeeper. Remember, the VLPFC is responsible for selection and inhibition. This specific lingering vulnerability suggests that while general executive functions bounce back quickly, the circuitry responsible for filtering noise and maintaining stable inhibitory control may require more active, targeted effort or a longer recovery period.
So the damage is not permanent, but the brain might need active intervention to fully reverse it. What specific interventions have been shown to target and reverse these structural and functional abnormalities in the PFC?
The Chimel and Kripa's review from 2025 highlights several approaches, and it confirms that structural and functional abnormalities are indeed plastic targets for intervention.
Okay, what's at the top of the list?
Mindfulness is perhaps the most heavily researched non-pharmacological approach. Mindfulness practices have been shown to induce neuroplastic changes that directly counteract the structural effects of chronic stress.
Oh, so?
Studies show it can significantly increase the thickness of the cortex in the PFC and the insula, both key regions that atrophy under stress. Functionally, it strengthens the interconnectivity within the executive networks.
And what about the emotional side, the brake pads?
It helps there too. Mindfulness has been linked to the restoration of normal caudate volume, and critically, it dampens the hyperreactivity of the amygdala, effectively restoring the VMPFC's brake function.
So that's turning thin brake pads back into thick ones and calming the engine simultaneously. What about interventions that focus on changing thinking patterns, like talk therapy?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has also shown measurable neurological impact beyond just teaching coping skills. While the study focused on chronic pain, a condition sharing some overlap with burnout rumination, it demonstrated that an 11-week CBT program was linked to increased gray matter volume in the DLPFC.
So changing your thoughts can physically change your brain.
It's powerful evidence that modifying negative or ruminative thought patterns can trigger trophic growth, an actual increase in brain volume in the executive center that shrinks during burnout.
And finally, what about targeted physical intervention for functional rescue? Can we physically nudge the circuits back into healthy operation?
Yes, non-invasive brain stimulation, NIBS, is a frontier showing huge promise. Transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS, targets specific regions using weak electrical currents.
And what happens when you do that?
When researchers targeted the left DLPFC, that's Brodmann area 946, the precise area often displaying hypoactivation and inefficiency in advanced burnout, it produced larger gains in sustained attention and executive updating than a sham procedure.
Wow.
This functional rescue reinforces the idea that these deficits are biological targets, not fixed character flaws. The technology suggests we can physically reinforce the executive network, helping it regain the synchronicity and bold efficiency that chronic stress has undermined. This offers a clear path toward cognitive recovery and enhanced resilience.
This has been a deeply detailed and ultimately hopeful deep dive into the neurological reality of chronic stress. To summarize the core learning, burnout is not just about emotional fatigue. It is a measurable neurological condition that leaves unmistakable objective fingerprints on your brain's command center.
We tracked the structural damage, confirming that chronic stress thins the volume of the ventromedial PFC, which is the brain's crucial brake on threat circuitry.
Right.
We then observed the dorsolateral PFC, struggling first with inefficient overdrive, a highly costly and metabolically exhausting state followed by a critical withdrawal of resources.
And the subjective experience of brain fog translates directly to the functional disconnection of the frontoparietal network. Specifically, that decoupling of the DLPFC and VLPFC, severely impeding flexible attentional control and the ability to switch mental sets, as detailed by the seminal work of Liston, McEwen, and Casey in 2009.
But the overwhelmingly good news is that these neurological changes are plastic. The structural atrophy and functional disconnections are often reversible through reduced stress exposure, and they are highly responsive to targeted interventions.
Like mindfulness, which restores thickness, CBT, which increases DLPFC volume, and even non-invasive brain stimulation, offering a clear, tangible path toward cognitive recovery.
Clear path.
So what stands out to you as the biggest, most critical challenge remaining for researchers who are trying to solve this problem globally?
The most provocative finding, I think, and one that demands far more research attention, is the neuroimaging evidence highlighting significant and often neglected sex differences in the neural response to chronic occupational stress.
Sex differences.
The Camille and Kerpes review notes that the current picture is still enigmatic, but the differences in where the damage manifests are robust across studies.
What kind of differences are we talking about?
For example, researchers frequently observe amygdala hypertrophy, or the physical enlargement of the fear center, which heightens threat reactivity. And this appears far more common in women struggling with emotional exhaustion.
And for men?
Conversely, caudate volume loss, a structure central to motivation, action selection, and cognitive control, is more often observed in men experiencing burnout.
That suggests that a standard one-size-fits-all treatment approach won't capture the entire patient population because the foundational pathology is physically different depending on the biological system.
Exactly. The final thought we want to leave you with is this. Until we close that scientific gap between the descriptive what, these measurable anatomical differences, and the causal why, the underlying hormonal or genetic reasons for this divergence, we will struggle to develop truly biologically tailored, gender-responsive, preventative, and treatment strategies for burnout.
That's the next frontier.
Understanding and addressing that divergence remains the critical challenge for future neuroscience.
A truly tailored solution requires seeing the whole picture.
Yes.
Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive into the brain's executive center.
My pleasure.
For the deep dive, I'm your host speaker.
And I'm your expert speaker.
We'll see you next time.